Let's summarize now the conception economic value added. Now we looked at capitalization of strategic expenses, and I already said that to my mind this is a very powerful toolkit within this conception of economic profit. And now I would like to discuss the relationship between the economic value added within this conception and market value added of any company. Somehow we already mentioned in our previous classes the overall value of the company can be represented by first capital employed component at the point zero when we are analyzing the company, plus the market value added, which is just the difference between the overall market value or enterprise value or EV and capital employed. So if from the enterprise value or EV we subtract capital employed, we will arrive at MVA, market value added. According to that conception, we can also say that the MVA of any company could be represented as the stream of EVA going for some particular period in time or even going forever. They should be interpreted as the present values of EVAs going yearly forever. All these expected EVAs or expected economic profits according to the major idea of that concept adjusted to the equity equivalence, they would be discounted by the rate, which is of course equal to the weighted average cost of capital. So the market value added, this is the gap between enterprise value and capital employed, but capital employed considered with the equity equivalents that are homemade assets made by the business analyst implementing this value-based framework. So from that follows, of course, that if those expected EVAs are based on the positive economic spread, when considering this equity equivalence, when making the computations of that spread, return on capital employed minus WACC, more smart in terms of the equity equivalence and the resource base actually applied when competing in the markets, when the economic spread is really expected to be positive, then of course MVA overall is positive. If economic spread is expected to become negative, at least in some years, then MVA would be much lower. If negative economic spreads will appear just occasionally in some years. But if we do expect the overall stream of economic profits to be negative, then of course MVA is negative. But then it follows that enterprise value would be even lower than the capital employed that we can just see here at that particular point in time when starting business analytics technique. So on that page, on that slide, we still use the same picture, but now we need to be in some details, to be involved into those details, how we can compute MVA in another way. We can understand MVA as a computation based on the very interesting interpretation of the spread per each common voting share. So in the equation here, you will see that MVA is equal to the difference between price per share minus economic book value per share, and then multiplied by the number of shares outstanding. And the key point here is economic book value. This is a conception based on the equity equivalence. Due to the adjustments to the capital employed, we already discussed them. Due to the need to make this homemade additional asset base, because we have these arguments in our strategic vision of a company and how it competes and which type of the resources it actually uses. And we are differentiating between strategic expenses and just regular, ordinary, simple expenses. And the strategic expenses would be capitalized and then capital employed would be increased. So the economic book value, this is the product when you divide your adjusted capital employed with the equity equivalents by the number of shares outstanding. So the spread price per share based on the expectations of the investors, it incorporates, of course, their understanding, their perception about the power of intellectual capital components in the business model of that company. So say it in other words, your outside investors trading assets, looking at everything you are doing within the business, they also may interpret the regular expenditures of the regular money that you spend to, let's say, to develop your market base or to upgrade your working force, your personnel and your professional qualifications and skills. They also might be viewed by the investors outside as being a type of investments, but not just regular expenses. I didn't put specific slides here, but there are many academic research pieces, papers already published, and even books that show that when you are running econometrical analysis of the data, applying this quantitative technique to understand the relationship, let's say, between the market prices of shares of samples of companies, how they are related to the expenses on marketing, advertising, training, personnel, those which are calling here when discussing EVA strategic expenses. The empirical data shows us very interesting event. The higher the expenses for market development and the higher the expenses for research and development, and the higher the expenses to upgrade your personnel skills, the higher would be the market price per share. But the previous traditional logic says the higher the marketing expense or the higher the training expense, the higher overall expenses which should be subtracted when computing your accounting profits. So your accounting profits are decreased because your expenses this year increased, other things being equal. And this traditional economic logic will require that the investors should not like, they should dislike the increase in the expenses for market development, for personnel qualifications, so on and so forth. But the quantitative research provides us with the opposite findings, saying investors are viewing them as if they are looking at specific investments which are treated in financial accounting and reporting as ordinary, regular, standard expenses subtracted fully 100% within the year they were incurred. But investors do not believe to this. They do understand that these are not regular, simple expenses. They have great strategic power. They will have really very serious impact over the company future, not just currently only, but also over the company future. So this economic book value, this is another creation of Stern-Stewart Consulting, because it depends on that equity equivalence. It captures equity equivalence inside. So this is also very important to understand that these metrics with the equity equivalence could be used also for corporate ratings. Somehow they can help us for better making our benchmarking, looking for different potential companies for acquisition, for selling businesses, so on and so forth. So the corporate ratings by the authors of the conception EVA, they are mainly based on these three types of measures. The first is standardized EVA. When computing that measure just for ranking purposes, in denominator, you see that you will use the capital employed with all these adjustments for equity equivalence from the previous year. And in nominator, when computing your economic profit or EVA, you will use capital employed for the current year. The second matrix, which is standardized market value added, also depends on the equity equivalence because they are integral part of economic book value, EBV. You are computing the spread between the price, market price per share, and economic book value per share. And then you will multiply that spread by the shares already outstanding at the market for each company and normalize it or divide it by capital employed for that particular current year, also with the equity equivalence. And the third measure is so-called profitability index, which describes the relationship between return on capital employed and weighted average cost of capital. If your profitability index is above 1, then it means, of course, you are continue creating value. So you see here, Stern and Stewart consultancy company developed that technique to make and represent the ratings for 1,000 companies from different countries, just to track the trends between these value creators and maybe in some cases value destroyers. And the same idea is also captured by the well-known in the world journal, which is called Fortune, because this is the journal mainly focused on many interesting new financial ideas and financial events. And Fortune also applies the same idea, a very close idea, creating the corporate rankings for 200 of so-called positive MV generators. So to summarize, we discussed that conception because it provides us very powerful toolkit how we can adjust the computations of the value creation processes of these metrics that captures value creation processes in the company, being much closer to the specific business model of the company. And the modern company is going to be unique and specific just due to the components of intellectual capital. So we've got that instrument, that toolkit, that of course then in the business analytics based on the idea of value creation should be applied to the particular companies in our professional business analytics.